All right, everyone, welcome to potentially the first ACU podcast.
I hope it is the first.
I'm here joined with Chris. I'm sure you've seen the video on YouTube, ACU Across Borders, the episode which we have done with Chris. A lecturer at ACU for this short time. He'll be going back to the UK soon. So I'm here joined with Chris to discuss philosophy of biology, and we hope this will be a fruitful discussion, a discussion where we'll learn a lot from him and what he has to share with us. So, Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Wupe? Is that how I pronounce your name?
Yes,
Wupe?
it is. Wupe Mwenya.
Yes, because coming to Zambia, Wupe's name is spelled B-U-P-E, and
Yes.
so I was thinking, is it Boop or Wupe? But it's Wupe, because the way they pronounce B is with a bit of a W sound as well. Am I meant to introduce myself?
You may.
Okay. So I'm currently a lecturer at the African Christian University. I'm here on attachment for 3 months, and my time here is coming towards an end. I'm a PhD student at the University of Bristol in England. That's how I've got the opportunity to do an attachment here in Zambia. And yeah, I mean, other background things. I was born in South Africa, spent some time living in Scotland, and then living in England. So I'm kind of nomadic. People ask me which country do I support for any sporting event. It goes in that order: South Africa, Scotland, England. But Scotland never wins anything, so usually it's just South Africa, England. Yeah, there's an introduction, as good as any, I guess.
Well, yeah, thanks for that introduction. And about my name, Dr. Killian always used to say Bupe. It's only now after 6-7 years that he gets it right, Wupe.
Yes.
So
he actually does it correctly now. Okay.
He does it correctly now. So if you struggle with my name, you can call me Gift or Matthew. They mean
Or
the
just
same
any.
thing.
Oh, okay. Not
Yes.
just because any name will do.
Yeah.
Like Steve.
Thanks. All right. With that out of the way, I know you touched on this in your introduction, but what brings you to ACU?
The Lord brought me to the ACU, providentially, if we're going for the Sunday school answer. But no, he really did. He was very gracious in opening the door to come to this institution. In terms of what brought me here, in terms of why I'm here to develop the Foundations in Science course. I've kind of done an overhaul of the syllabus, not because I thought it was necessary, but because Dr. Killian asked me to do that. And I'm here to gain experience as a lecturer and as a teacher as well. From a very selfish perspective, those are reasons why I'm here. I'm also here because I love Southern Africa, and I heard about the ACU, and so for a long time have wanted to come here, but I'll let you ask the next question before I talk more about that.
You were mentioning Southern Africa. Has there been anything that's interested you about Zambia? Anything that you've liked?
Well, I mean, before I came to Zambia, what interested me is that my mum grew up a little bit here. So from the age of 4 till 9, as a little girl, she lived on Lake Road, which is really nearby. And having not been here myself, I found it odd to retrace my mum's footsteps in Zambia. It was a bush. This was the 60s. When I show her photos of Zambia on Google Earth or pictures I've taken, she's shocked at how much it's developed. So that's something that interested me about Zambia, was seeing my family roots. My mum's mum moved to Harare in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, when my mum's mum was 5. So all my grandparents are British or American, but really my granny from the age of 5, she has such an African spirit. So that's one reason why I was drawn to Zambia.
You know, usually we say things like it's a small world, but here we can literally say it's a small globe.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned your mom has been here in Zambia, and now you're here. That's so amazing.
Yes.
So, how did you hear about ACU, and are you self-funded?
I heard about the ACU from a sermon by Dr. Vodi Baukam in, I think, 2020. And it was just on YouTube, and hearing about this university that you have to integrate the Bible into whatever course you teach. So if you learn neuroscience, if you learn psychology, all of these things that are considered to be secular, Vodi explained how actually, at this institution, you must deeply integrate the Bible with that course. You can't just regurgitate what you've heard before. And since I love philosophy, I love biology, and I've always wanted to integrate those two things with my beliefs as a Christian, I thought ACU was a pretty sweet-sounding university, but it's only recently that I've actually had the chance to come. The other question was, am I self-funded?
Yes.
Okay. So I was self-funded. I did a master's in philosophy of biology and psychology, and then the first year of my PhD as well, which is just a PhD in philosophy, but focusing on the philosophy of biology. Both the master's and the first year of the PhD was self-funded. I was working for a company called PLOS. It's an online science publisher. All their articles are free, so I'd fully recommend going to them. Shout out to PLOS. But I am glad not to be self-funded anymore. I got funding in September 2023, which was very unexpected, but I'm deeply grateful for that opportunity. And shout out, therefore, to the SWWDTP, which is my funding body. The full name of the funding body, it's called the UK Research Institute Arts and Humanities Research Council South West and Wales Doctoral Training Partnership. In other words, the UKRI AHRC SWWDTP 2. That is my funding body. So thanks to them.
Well, that's a long name they have there. And you mentioned you seeing a video of Dr. Bockham, and it's so amazing how much technology has developed that you can just see a video of someone instantly, and that's what led you to come here.
Yes.
And I studied education and computers, so the computer aspect, you seeing a video of Vodi really captured me.
Yes.
Yes, so...
I mean, what you do makes a real difference.
Yes.
So Bupe is in charge of a lot of the media and promotion at the ACU, and without the kind of thing that you're doing, I wouldn't have had any of the access or knowledge about the ACU that I've had since learning about it through Vodi's sermon. So media, these guys, they make a huge difference. Anyway.
So you've heard that, people, media people, give them respect. They do so
Give
much.
them money. Give them and respect.
Yeah. So what led you to do your PhD?
Well, I know I asked you to ask me this, but it is a big question. So what led me to do my PhD in the form of a story was that I was wasting time at my previous employer, PLOS. Again, shout out to PLOS. I was employed by them full-time before I transitioned to being employed by them part-time. So in 2018, full-time employed by PLOS, and I was wasting time listening to an argument by an atheist physicist on YouTube, a guy called Lawrence Krauss, and he spoke about complexity. And he spoke about how complexity arises naturally in the context of like crystals and snowflakes, which are very complex. It arises naturally. He also said how complexity arises naturally in weather systems, in storms and that kind of thing. And then he made the point that, well, biology is also complex. And since snowflakes and weather systems are complex and they happen naturally, why are we surprised that the complexity in biology could also happen naturally? Basically, he's trying to say that when people look at the complexity in biology, they think it's designed, and they don't think it can happen naturally. And so he said, well, it happens in nature, therefore why not in biology? So I thought of an answer to that question. What is it that makes the complexity in biology different and unique compared to the complexity you might find in a snowflake, or in a storm, or in some other non-biological, naturally occurring system? And my answer to that question led me to think maybe I should look into it more in an academic context, which is what led me to do this PhD.
Interesting thoughts right there. And about complexity, you had this idea about how biological complexity differs from other kinds of complexity. But why does this matter? Why should we be concerned about this?
So for a long time, I did my undergraduate in natural sciences, looking at biology, and then specializing in neuroscience. And one of the reasons I was drawn to biology was, more than physics or chemistry, there was just a beauty in it. Like, I don't know, for whoever's listening here, if you go online and you just search a video on YouTube called The Inner Life of the Cell, you see this incredible animation of all the, for want of a better word, all the machinery that's used inside of a cell. And I remember being in awe of how complex and how intricate and how interdependent even the smallest parts of biology was. And yet, I had struggled to find a way of capturing what exactly is it that makes this so awesome. Because I think everyone sees it when you look at in chemistry, when you just look at a molecule like H2O, it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Electrons are cool and stuff. But when you look at like some of these proteins in your cell that literally have legs and walk along these train track like protein filaments, it blows my mind. And so for me at least, I would love to have an account of what makes biology uniquely beautiful. And I think part of the answer comes in the fact that the complexity you see in biology is different to the kind of complexity you see in other systems.
So are you saying that physics and chemistry aren't also beautiful?
That's rude. I'm not saying that. Although I am biased, so yes, I do think biology is the best. But no, I think the beauty that you find in physics and in chemistry, it is. I mean, look, anyone can find anything beautiful for any reason, in a sense. I mean, in some sense, it's in the eye of the beholder. However, often people will say physics is elegant. It has laws that describe huge amounts of the universe, very relatively simple laws when it comes to how much they explain and describe. And so you can almost reduce things down to, often at least it seems you can reduce things down to the level of an equation. And people find that really beautiful. And chemistry, I've heard chemistry is a bit messier. It's harder to predict certain aspects of chemistry. But nevertheless, in chemistry, you have a kind of similar beauty where you have the periodic table, and that describes, as far as we know, all the known elements in the universe. And even just on an A4 page, I've seen it on mugs, like the whole periodic table. And you think about how much of the universe that accounts for. Again, there's an elegance there. There's a beauty there that is in physics and chemistry. So it's not that they're not beautiful. I think their beauty is seen in the elegance of being able to explain so much with relatively little. But biology, the reason I want to look at that is its beauty is more elusive. It's more different. It's not like I can reduce all of life to a simple set of physical laws. In this sense, it's not like I can use a simple law to predict what the genome of a rat would look like, or what the genome of E. coli, this bacteria, what it would look like. It's very hard to make solid predictions about the nature of life without just simply observing life. And so biology often doesn't have this structure where I can know the intricate details of life just by referring to some elegant or simple law. So I think the beauty in biology lies elsewhere, but is not diminished just because it has an almost different kind of beauty. If anything, I'm dedicating a lot of my time to it because I think it's a pretty awesome kind of beauty. Interesting thoughts there. I'm sorry, I ramble a lot. Was that understandable? Yeah.
No, we need you to explain all that.
Yeah.
So that we really get what you're saying.
Okay.
Now, moving on to your thesis question.
Okay.
What makes biology appear designed? Why are you focusing on this question? There's so many questions you can focus on, which you can ask, but why that particular question?
Well, I think it relates to what I've been saying already, is that biology has a unique beauty, and if nothing else, you can remember that this, for me, is the answer to what makes biology uniquely beautiful, is that it appears designed. I think that answers the question. So if we're thinking what makes biology beautiful compared to physics or chemistry, I know people, will say physics and chemistry also sustained by God, also designed. But I think in biology, when you look at the intricacy of it, even non-Christians, even people who don't believe there's a designer, because I understand that it's not merely non-Christians, Muslims believe in a designer, but people who do not believe that life on Earth came from an intelligent mind, even they will concede that biology looks designed. They might not say the same thing about H2O or chemical things or physical things, but they've struggled to escape design language in biology. And so I think it's an extremely interesting question. I can go on because there is something else I want to say, but
no, please,
yeah,
please feel free.
So, for example, and I think one of the biggest examples of someone who thought biology appeared designed is Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin, as many of the people listening to this might know, came up with the theory of evolution. And one of his motivations for coming up with that theory is he read the works of a man called William Paley in the early 1800s. And William Paley basically argued for intelligent design. So he was saying that if you go on a beach and you find a watch just lying there, you don't know where the watch came from, nevertheless, just picking the watch up, you might be able to see how the cogs, how the second hand, the minute hand, the hour hand, how they all fit together so well. It's almost, in his words, it's almost contrived for a purpose. And he then argued that you would conclude the watch was designed. And his argument he then extends to biology. Just as all the parts in a clock or a watch fit together so well, so intricately, so elegantly, so too you find that in biology. And then he spends the rest of his work looking at eyes and various systems in various organisms and saying, look, this looks designed. So Charles Darwin read that, and he wanted to explain why life looks designed, but using natural processes to explain it, rather than supernatural intervention in the form of just a straight-up miracle. And so Darwin didn't say life doesn't look designed. Rather, he believed it did look designed, and that was one of his motives for getting his theory of evolution out there, was to explain the appearance of design. So I think the importance of this question of what makes biology appear designed goes back beyond Darwin, but certainly goes back to someone who's considered the founding father of a lot of biology we do today, and certainly evolutionary biology.
Interesting thoughts there about biology being designed, especially when you talked about how even those who don't believe in a designer, how they still marvel at biology and say, this is designed. And as Christians, we are blessed by knowing the designer.
It is designed,
yeah. And knowing that it's designed, who the designer is.
But even before you move on to the next question, one thing I'd want to say on that is the beauty and wonder that Charles Darwin finds in evolution. He ends his book talking about endless forms most beautiful, and how evolution can explain the diversity of life and the sophistication of life.
Yes.
And I think it was the sophistication of life that really caused him to think, oh, this looks designed. How do I explain that?
Yes.
And the point I want to make is this: the beauty that people feel, the awe that people feel at the evolutionary process, is linked to how well it can explain the appearance of design in all of the diversity of life. So if evolutionary biology was not, and I'm not making big claims about how much it explains at this point, I'm just stating it as a hypothetical, but if evolutionary biology was unable to account for the appearance of design in biology, if it wasn't able to explain the sophistication, if it wasn't able to explain the diversity, which also makes it look, like work of genius, then you wouldn't feel awe at the evolutionary process. So I think the awe that people feel at evolution corresponds to the degree that it explains the appearance of design. And therefore, the thing that gives us awe about biology, at its root, I think, is that it appears designed. And then any awe that people feel at evolution, not any, but a lot of it comes from how well it can explain that awesome appearance of design. So I think it all actually still hinges on the appearance of design. And I don't think that's often emphasized. But when you think about it and what motivated Darwin, I think he would be disappointed if his theory failed to explain that. So yeah.
Interesting thoughts on evolution. And I have a question. I've seen people say things like, in terms of evolution, that a bird that lived in a certain area, due to those conditions, that its beak grew long for hunting purposes, and that the theory of evolution does not account or explain that a designer came about. So there are people who feel and say, wherever life is, it will evolve to suit its surroundings. But you are showing that, look, with all of that, it still shows you that there's a designer, that he planned that if this turtle lives in this area, it will have a longer neck. So turtle tortoise, if it lives in this region, it will have a longer neck to help with hunting and stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say to what people think concerning that?
Okay. So I think there are two things to say about that. One is what you were talking about is if you believe that God used evolution to make everything, which is the perspective called theistic evolution or evolutionary creationism or something like that, then often people will take that line of argument. They'll say, well, it's, when Newton discovered how gravity works, or at least he was able to describe it well, he was led to worship God. He didn't say, I've now described gravity, I have no need for God. Rather, the more he understood, the more he was led to worship God. In the same way, someone who believes God used evolution to make everything might make a statement like, I'm led to worship God because of this. It's such an elegant process, this natural selection which shapes life, leading to all the beauty we see today. I worship God as a result of seeing that. And you can certainly take that approach. And for me personally, I do feel awe at how adaptable life is. I think Christians, especially around Darwin's time, were wrong to say that species cannot change at all, cannot adapt at all, in the sense of growing longer necks, developing different beaks. As we know today, we know it happens with bacteria developing antibiotic resistance, being able to digest new foods. I feel awe when I look at that because it's not in conflict with how God designed the universe. It's informing me about how God designed the universe. And in this context, even as a Christian, we did this with my students, the command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. I would ask my students this question. Maybe I'll ask you this question. And it's a very basic question, so it'll be easy. Does the earth have high places and low places?
Yes, it does.
Does it have hot places and cold places?
Yes.
Does it have places on land and in the sea?
Yes.
Yes. How can you fill all of those places without being adaptable? Right? How can animals fulfill that creation mandate to fill all of these environments and not have the tools to change when they need to? For the Arctic, losing the color of your fur. For the heat, being able to have shorter fur and being able to run longer distances and to thermoregulate, that is to manage how hot things are. You need these things and you need adaptability. So it doesn't surprise me that God has built adaptability into life. And so I also feel awe at that.
Okay.
So yeah.
Wow, thank you for that. So, of late we've been seeing things, particularly in the Western Europe, of where teachers, lecturers, or people who are outspoken are cancelled, or they are threatened to their degree or whatever legitimacies they had are threatened because of their controversial statements regarding design in biology.
Okay.
So as someone at a European institution, and isn't talking about apparent design in biology controversial? Is it something you're worried about? How do you plan to work through that or around that?
Okay. So what I would say is there are people who very explicitly I'm being quite gentle in my approach in the PhD. I'm just talking about apparent design. I'm not even making strong claims about... I have my beliefs about life being designed and stuff, but the PhD is not making strong claims about that. Rather, I'm just giving people tools to think about these questions. But there's a man at my University of Bristol, called Professor Stuart Burgess. I think he looks at the engineering behind electrical circuits. And he not only believes in the fact that biology and all of life is designed, but he's a young Earth creationist. For those of you who don't know, that's probably just about the most controversial position you can take when it comes to creationism. It includes the belief that the Earth is young and that God created all the animals separately and that it doesn't have a universal common ancestor. It has those beliefs. And he's respected in his field because, I suppose it might be because he's not a biologist directly, but nevertheless, he's very good at what he does. So the idea that there's a universal form of persecution coming on people who are sometimes outspoken about their beliefs here isn't always true. It has been true in some cases, but one of the things I've been pleasantly surprised by is how open my university is to people who have diverging viewpoints on this issue. Another thing I'll say is that personally, at least for now, maybe if I pursue a career in academia, maybe I'll become more worried. Because it is true, it's harder to become published in academia once your beliefs are made popular or people know what you believe about these issues. The reviewers might tend... And I've worked, again, at a science journal. I've seen the peer review process. It's good that it's there, but it's certainly not perfect. And so it can lead to difficulties in publishing. But as it stands now, I'm not too worried. My supervisor, Professor Samir Okasha, is very... He is a naturalist. He believes that the universe... I think he's an atheist, but he is extremely... as almost any good philosopher should be, he's extremely open to ideas that he doesn't personally believe and entertaining them. So for me, it's been a pleasure to be at the University of Bristol and be able to, make sure I'm being nuanced and everything else, but to tell people what I actually think about things. They've been open to different viewpoints. So in that sense, I'm not too worried in that regard.
And we hope for the best for you regarding this journey of yours, and we pray and hope that you will just be faithful. Just tell them, hey, this is what it is, or you're in your research, whatever it is you're doing.
Yes.
We hope for the best.
Yes.
So I know you hinted at this earlier, you spoke about it a bit. So what do you think makes biology appear designed? Are there clear indicators, or is it just us making up something?
Is it just a value judgment? People are just like, it's personal, that it appears designed, but that is a good question. I hate to jump around, just on the previous question as well, just to touch on again why what I'm doing isn't controversial. The reason I'm saying it's not controversial is because, again, I'm talking about apparent design, the appearance of design. And that is something that philosophers and biologists, regardless of whether they think biology is actually designed, universally acknowledge, or at least almost universally acknowledge, such as Robert Cummins, Francis Halligan, Tim Lewins at Cambridge, my supervisor. They acknowledge there's an appearance of design, and that's what my PhD is exploring. And that's why I don't think it's controversial. But yeah, so your next question was, how do I actually answer the question? What makes biology appear designed?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. So the answer to this question, I can do it again in the form of a story. Going back to that office when I was listening to Lawrence Krauss talk about complexity in snowflakes and in weather systems, and comparing that to complexity in biology. And my answer to the question about what makes life appear designed is the same answer I would give to the question of what makes the complexity in biology unique. So I'll just go through the story. In snowflakes and in weather systems, they are complex, but often the pattern is this. You have a simple set of lower level physical laws or rules or causes that lead to very complex higher level effects. So with a snowflake, you have some physical laws that govern how crystallization happens. And the higher level result is a very complex snowflake crystal. In the same way, weather systems, they're extremely complex, but at the end of the day, the physical causes of those weather systems, you have these lower level physical laws that are governing the whole system. And those are relatively simple, those laws, but they lead to hugely complex results at a higher level. And so storms are just like really, really hard to predict and stuff, and they're very messy when you zoom out, essentially. Whereas I think the pattern for biology is the opposite. With biology, often what you get, and this is a bit of a simplistic answer, so if people have objections, that's fine. But I'm just trying to make it as simple as I can. With biology, you get a lot of complex, lower level causes that add up to very elegant, simple, higher level results. So let me explain this a little bit. Your ability to recognize a face. You can see I'm in this room interviewing me, and let's define your ability to recognize my face as something like you see a face and you can correctly say the name of the person whose face that is. So you see my face and you can say that's Chris. Let's define that as facial recognition. In psychology, you might call that a kind of stimulus response thing. Very easy to describe. Stimulus, you see the face. Response, you say the name. Very simple. But the amount of complexity that goes into your ability to do that it's beyond me. It's huge. Your ability to recognize a face depends on taking the light coming from my face, turning it into electrical signals in your brain, comparing what you are seeing now to a prior set of memories of my face, being able to correctly tell whether those memories match your current visual experience, and then being able to communicate, if it is correct, communicate, as it were, with your tongue so that it makes the noise, that's Chris. And that's an extremely simplified summary of all of the complex parts that come together when you recognize a face. If I remove your ability to turn light into electrical signals, you can't recognize faces. If I remove your ability to have prior memories, you can't recognize faces. If I remove your ability to speak, then you couldn't recognize a face as far as I've defined it. And so, again, and you see this over and over again in biology, you get these really elegant, amazing abilities, like an enzyme. Do you know what enzymes are?
I've come across them in the human body.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so yes, an enzyme is a molecule that digests stuff. Yeah. It breaks it down usually. And so these enzymes are sometimes quite complex. So if you take an enzyme like chymotrypsin, it's an enzyme that digests proteins, that enzyme needs at least 3 components in place. It's called a catalytic triad. It needs 3 components in place, and it needs all sorts of other components to stabilize it before it can digest proteins at all. And unless it's that complicated, it can't do it at all. And the ability to digest that protein is really simple to describe, really easy. It breaks it in 2. Easy. And yet, the amount of complexity that goes into that ability is huge. And so what I think makes life look designed is the more complex something needs to be at a lower level before it works at all at a higher level, the more designed it appears. That's how I answer that question.
Wow.
I don't know if that was easy to follow or if you have any follow-ups on that.
It was, especially the example of me seeing you and attaching your name to your face and saying, no, that's Chris, not anyone else.
Yes.
You know, and that's so amazing, and especially about the enzyme example of how biology is complex, but we also make it simple in understanding.
Yes.
So that's a job biologists have, you know, making the complex simple to understand.
Yes. And it's everywhere in biology, just so that it leads on to the next question. Well, like you see this everywhere. Your ability. I spoke about stimulus response. Any, at least in psychology, any stimulus response input-output style behavior will be complex in this way. Like if you see a predator and you run, stimulus, I see the predator, run away. Easy to describe. You see it, and you move the other way. But think about how coordinated and complex your legs need to be and your nervous system needs to be to not trip and fall over and to tell where to run as well and to be able to navigate even while the predator is chasing you. And bacteria do this. Bacteria can sense where food is. Stimulus, I can detect food. Response, I move towards the food. And their ability to do that, again, so complex. And so again, if you want to put a word to it, the word that I'm using for this is coordination. Mm-hmm. Coordination describes the more complex something needs to be at a lower level before it gets some really simple higher level ability, like running away from predators or recognizing faces. The more complex it needs to be at a lower level to work, the more coordinated it is.
You mentioned how coordination makes biology appear designed and how this sets biology apart from physics and chemistry. But many man-made objects are also complex and coordinated, right? And these man-made objects are not biological. So surely coordination isn't some special thing belonging only to biology, right?
In summary, I guess what you're saying is, I've just said that this is what makes biology special, but we see the same thing in man-made objects. Mm-hmm. So how can it make biology special when man-made objects also do the same thing? And they're not biological. Mm-hmm. Okay, so my answer to that question is absolutely correct, yes. I do think that the same thing that gives me wonder and awe when I look at biology, this coordination, is the same thing that gives me wonder and awe when I look at man-made objects. Think about live television from Australia. Sorry to those of you who are in Australia, this won't apply to you, but for most of the world, Australia is very far away. Imagine having, let's define a very simple ability. Let's say, I'll give you a quiz and I'll say, I need you to write word for word what the President of Australia is saying or I don't know if it's maybe it's Prime Minister, sorry. What the Prime Minister of Australia is saying right now, word for word. Now the ability to correctly copy words, just basically write down what someone says, that's it. It's fairly simple to describe. But the amount of complexity that goes into you being able to do that from Zambia is huge. You would need some kind of audio broadcasting system. You would need satellites orbiting the globe to transmit signals. Noises coming from the president's mouth become signals sent to a satellite, which bounce around the world and then get sent to Zambia, then go into a machine that can then take those electrical signals and turn them into the same noises, and then you yourself being able to interpret those noises and write them down. So complex! And it's man-made. And so I think it's the same, for want of another word, the same glory, like the same wonder you would see at a man-made invention, like live broadcasting, is the same wonder that we see in biology. A simpler example would be a bike. If you take a bike, let's imagine I'm building a bike, and at each step of the way, I'm measuring how many miles an hour can I ride this bike if I do this thing with my legs and do a kind of riding motion. So let's go from the beginning of the assembly process. I've broken the bike down, I have its most basic parts, and at each step I'm measuring how fast it is. If I just have a wheel, how fast will the bike go if I try to ride it? That's a question.
If you just have the wheel.
Just the wheel, and I start doing this, how fast will it go?
It won't be that fast compared to a bike with two wheels, right?
Yeah, well, it'll barely move at all. If it's just a wheel by itself without pedals or anything, it'll just be still. So it's like it's zero.
How will you even sit on it?
Exactly. And if I had just two wheels, would it be still, basically? Because they're not attached to anything, they're just wheels. Yeah. If I had two wheels and pedals but no frame, would it move at all? No. If I had two wheels, pedals, frame, but it's not fitted together properly, will it move at all?
No. Have difficulty moving.
Exactly. Only once it reaches a certain threshold of complexity in its arrangement, then suddenly the ability to go at, 15 miles an hour when you ride it appears. It's almost like something out of nothing, like light out of darkness. You got a wheel, nothing happens. 2 wheels, nothing happens. A frame, but no pedals, nothing happens. And you keep building up the complexity, and then suddenly there's a spike. Suddenly I can ride it. It goes at a certain speed. I think that's awesome. And I think the same thing would happen if you rebuilt many biological systems. You rebuild the enzyme, doesn't do anything, and then suddenly it can digest. You rebuild your brain, doesn't do anything, gets complex enough, suddenly you can recognize faces and do a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think the glory is the same.
Interesting.
But I think that's okay.
Yeah, so complexity in transmitting signals, and now we just simply turn on the TV and we don't even think about what goes on in the background.
Exactly. It's that simple. It's that, because I know, okay, so for the nerds out there who are listening to this, the philosophers, I know people might take issue with how I'm defining simplicity and complexity, and they might say those are subjective terms. And I'll just tell you, during the PhD, I'm very much concerned with those questions and exploring them and trying to create a notion of complexity or borrow a notion of complexity that is robust. I don't have time to explain all of that in this podcast, though. So I thought I'd just put a side note for those of you who might worry about how I'm using those two terms. There are ways to define them more robustly, but we don't have time to explore that here.
Yeah, so earlier on you mentioned coordination, and it's what makes biology and man-made objects appear designed. But surely, aren't there things where they're not complex or coordinated, but they also appear designed? For example, if I went to a forest and looked on the forest floor and found a metal board just lying on the ground, I would conclude that that object looks designed, even if it is particularly complex
or
even if it isn't particularly complex or coordinated. It's a simple spherical metal ball, but it looks designed.
Okay, so basically the question is, there are things, you're pointing out that there are things that look designed, but they're not coordinated.
Yeah.
Right? They're not complex.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, you might even have a cup, right? Like, cups look designed, but they're not that complex. It's a cylinder, a hollow cylinder whose top is missing. Like, that's it. That's basically...
I'll never look at cups the same.
Yeah, you'll find them far more boring than you used to now that I've defined it that way. But yeah, and they're relatively simple, but they still look designed. Well, let me break this down into 2 parts. First, I really want to explain why coordination makes something look designed, because I think I can drill it in even a bit deeper there, and then I'll explain why other things can look designed without being coordinated. So to explain, coordination makes things look designed in this sense, because it looks like you need a goal in mind in order to get something to be so complex before it's useful at all. The reason a bike looks designed is because how likely is it that I assembled all the parts of a bike in the right way before it can work? It's not very likely, right? Like, a tornado passes through, it's not going to produce something you can ride, right? I mean, yeah, and the reason it looks designed is because before it's useful, you first need all of these parts to be in place, and then it's useful. And so why on earth would those parts come together unless someone has a goal in mind? So that's why coordination makes things look designed, because it's hard to think why all these parts would come together before they're useful. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so it feels, and same with man-made objects. So that's the flavor of apparent design that coordination is trying to capture. This kind of forethought where you first need a lot of complex structures and parts to be in place before the thing works. Then it makes it look like your goal is to make the thing work in that way. You see? And then the next question is, well, nevertheless, simple stuff can look designed. Like, you don't need many parts to be in place for a cup. You just need a cylinder. Just smash a hole in it, I guess. If you smash the right hole, that's it. Like, not much forethought. I imagine there are lots of rocks around volcanoes. You know how sometimes you get these rocks that they've got this glassy surface, and sometimes they might even have a kind of like I hate using this word, a concave shape, where it looks like a bowl or something like that. It's a rock, and it's produced by natural processes. But it's basically a cup, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's nice and simple in that sense. Now, the reason a metal ball looks designed, I think, if you found it in a forest or whatever, is because broadly, I think there are many levels of apparent design. I'm not going to explain all of them, but I'll say the most basic level of apparent design is something that is unlikely to happen naturally. Something that is unlikely to happen naturally is something that strikes us as looking designed. The more nature opposes the existence of something, like a metal ball in the middle of a forest, the more it looks like it was deliberately put there. So for example, does nature produce perfect spheres all the time? Does it?
No, not all the time.
No, not all the time. Certainly not in a forest. You don't just get perfect spherical objects. Does it usually make them uneven?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does it usually purify metals, or does it usually leave metals in rocks?
Usually leaving metal on rocks. Yeah.
Yeah. So nature tends to oppose the existence of metal balls, just perfect spherical metal balls. Maybe it might happen sometimes. Maybe a volcano might produce something like, I don't know. I'm not a geologist. But in a forest, you don't see this happening. And that the last question is, do you normally see these popping up in forests? Do you see metal balls on the forest floor all the time?
No,
No.
not at all.
No. And those three things and many other things are what make it look designed. Because like nature doesn't do this. And so it looks designed. And coordination is just a subset of that. It's saying, yes, it looks unlikely, and it looks unlikely for this reason. Because it looks unlikely that all these complex parts would come together. So apparent design is just stuff that looks unlikely, and then coordination is a subset of that stuff.
Wow. You know, after this, I'm definitely not going to look at cups the same way. Because you've really affected my thinking.
I have managed to make everything more boring than it needs to be.
Yeah, so
Yes.
coming back to your PhD.
But I find it interesting, so that's fine. Sorry, anyway.
Yeah, coming back to your PhD, why are you focusing on just one form of apparent design rather than focusing on apparent design more broadly?
Okay. I might have part of the answer is that I think coordination in particular is what makes biology unique and beautiful. So think about you do get beauty, even beauty that makes people think life is designed in the natural world, like a snowflake. People look at snowflakes and they're like, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. The universe must be designed. It's too beautiful not to be, right? And you get all of these like weather systems and stuff, and people sometimes they see apparent design in that. But the reason I'm focusing on coordination in particular is because unlike a snowflake, unlike weather systems, in biology, the way it looks designed is often that it's coordinated. Often you don't get in a weather system, you don't get the weather system becoming so complex in such a specific way that suddenly it develops a brand new ability, and if you tweak the weather system slightly, it loses that ability. Usually the weather system just doesn't have that kind of appearance of purposefulness. And so that's why I'm focusing on coordination in particular, because I think it crops up time and again in biology. Again, people might have objections, but we don't have time to explore all of them in this podcast. But yeah.
All right. So earlier on, you talked about Charles Darwin, and particularly you mentioned how he was interested in using evolution to explain the appearance of design in biology. Could you just talk a little more about that?
Yes. So one of the motivations, I've said before, Darwin was motivated by the appearance of design. There was another man called Alfred Russel Wallace who came up with a theory of natural selection at almost exactly the same time as Darwin did. And Wallace got his info out first, and Darwin was like, oh dear, I need to publish. Because now someone else is coming up with the same idea. But the thing that distinguishes Darwin and Wallace is that Darwin wanted to use his theory to explain design, or apparent design, whereas Wallace was more just interested in how organisms change over time. He wasn't really interested in that question. So yes, that's why I really do emphasize Darwin was interested in apparent design. Yeah, was there a reason you wanted to know the answer to that question?
Well, yeah, because you mentioned that Darwin wanted to explain apparent design using evolution. Do you think evolution can explain coordination?
Oh, okay. Because coordination is a form of apparent design, and Darwin wanted to explain apparent design. So can it explain? Okay. Basically, can all of these complex things I've been speaking about, facial recognition, these enzymes, all of that, can coordinated structures like that evolve? My answer to that question is sometimes. Sometimes at least, yes. So coordinated structures are hard to evolve from scratch, is what I'd say. Think again about the bike. I know it's not a biological example, but if you think about the bike, is it useful when it's just a wheel? It's only useful once a bunch of steps have happened.
Yeah, when it's complete.
Yeah. And so if you start from scratch and you just have the bike as its basic parts just like all over the floor, it's not going to be very useful. In the same way, in biology, if there's an enzyme and I need to assemble all sorts of parts before that enzyme becomes useful for survival, then it's unlikely to evolve from scratch, you see. Because if the path of building that enzyme, if none of the steps in building that enzyme are useful to survival, for example, then it's unlikely to evolve. And so in that situation, coordinated structures seem unlikely to be able to emerge because they're useless until a certain point. And it's very unlikely that you reach that point, just by chance at least, or even by random mutation without natural selection. I won't be able to explain random mutation and natural selection. I'm just going to assume that the hearers of this podcast know what I mean by those terms. But I do think that coordinated structures can and do evolve often. And I think almost, not every, but so many instances of evolution of new abilities, phenotypes, like new traits, are examples of coordinated things evolving. And maybe I can explain a bit of that. So for example, you have bacteria. There's a man, a biologist, really respect this guy, a guy called Andreas Wagner. And he looks at the evolution of new abilities and new traits in life. And he asks, how can evolution innovate? How can evolution create and be creative? And so that's his field of study. And he looks at these bacteria, and he's found bacteria that within the past 100 years are able to digest a man-made chemical. In the past 100 years, they have evolved that ability. The reason is because of something called, the fancy word is exaptation. All that means is that you take something that's used for one purpose and you use it for another purpose. And so, in other words, a lot of the machinery the bacteria already needed was there, and if you just tweak it slightly, it can now digest a new molecule. And that ability to digest that molecule is extremely coordinated. It's very complex. And it depends on all sorts of enzymes being in place and that kind of thing. But it evolved, and it really did evolve. Why? Because a lot of the machinery it already needs is already in place. And so there are loads of ways, because life is so complicated, there are loads of ways you can make small adjustments to life, small adjustments to your metabolism, and you can get brand new abilities. And those abilities are truly coordinated because you already have so much of the machinery in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I want to find out, does this also add to how we are better suited now to treat certain diseases, improve sports? Players, back in the day are not the same as they are today. We have found out new things to improve the body, how it works. Would you say that leads into that, some part of it?
Maybe. Because a lot of what you've mentioned is a mixture. Some of those are biological traits, like athletic ability, as long as you're not taking drugs. Stay off the steads. There's a podcast about anabolic steroids. I'm sorry. That ability, if you're not on drugs, is a natural ability. Whereas some of the other things you mentioned, such as medical advancements, that's human innovation, right? And so I would put human innovation and cultural innovation and stuff, new technologies, in a separate category.
Okay.
Because that really is just design. Like, again, yes, I believe God designed everything, but if we're talking about, did these things come about naturally by some evolutionary process? Did new medical innovations come about by natural selection acting on random mutations? No, it came about because people had creative ideas, maybe building on previous people, but they still created stuff in a way that evolution doesn't, on a different path. So I wouldn't say that the two are parallel, but I would say that some abilities that we have developed could be examples of coordination, evolving. I'm not sure our ability to digest milk is an example of that. So I don't know how much you know, but you know how in Asia, usually ethnically, people from East Asia do not digest milk as well as people who are ethnically European or ethnically African. Were you aware of that?
I do know something about India where they don't necessarily get milk from cows, so it sort of affects like the economy.
Yes.
Yeah, and how much milk they take.
Yes, and so the ability to digest milk as an adult is something that often people from European and African ethnicities and other ethnicities do have, but people from East Asian ethnicities don't often have as much. And the reason for that is that there's a switch. When you're a child, you have your genes, you have your DNA, and your genes produce a protein, and that protein allows you to digest milk. And when you're a child, when you're a baby, you need milk, right? And so the gene is on. And then when you become an adult, the gene turns off, so you can't digest milk anymore. And that's how the genome of many people who are ethnically East Asian, that's how their genome works. For us, the gene, the ability to turn that gene off, it's broken, basically. and what that means is that you can just keep digesting milk because the off switch is broken, so it's just always on. You can always digest milk. But I don't think that would be an example of getting a new coordinated ability. Rather, to me, that seems to be like you're taking an existing system which has the coordinated ability to turn a gene on or off, and you are jumbling that system so that it no longer has that ability. So I think in a weird way that would almost be an example of decreasing coordination in a way that increases fitness. It increases your ability to digest milk and that kind of thing. But there are other examples that I think are genuine examples of coordination evolving.
Interesting. Coming back to your thesis question, what makes biology appear designed? Now, I want to find out, why do you want the PhD to end on a question rather than a solid conclusion? As human beings, we like something just to be clear, like yes, no, clear answers. We like clear conclusions, like a story. You want conclusion. But why do you want that?
To end on a question.
To end on a question for a PhD.
So I guess it's important. The question, I hate putting it. The question is, the question is, what question? It's true. The question is, what question do I want the PhD to end on? So the question I will answer, God willing, in the PhD is what makes biology look designed. I do intend to answer that question. But the question I want the PhD to end on is this. So we've just said how some coordinated structures can evolve, right? And those structures can evolve when you take something, a system that's used for one thing, and you use it for something else. That's called exaptation, where you take something that's used for one thing, use it for something else. But there's a question that results from that, namely, is that true in every single case, that there's some chain of taking something that's used for one thing and using it for something else, such that you can build all of life just by co-opting things on this huge chain of like, it's used for one thing, it's used for something else, and you go along the chain and eventually you end up with all of life. The question is basically this: does coordination could it evolve in every case? That's the question I want to end it on. And I've given a rambly explanation, but that's the question. Can coordination evolve in every case? If it can evolve in every case, what you are assuming is that there is this, and I'm going to get technical here, sorry for those of you who might not be able to follow along with this. If you assume it can evolve in every case, you're assuming there is this huge chain of exaptations that leads from one structure to another until you get all of life. It's like imagining that you have a car engine and I can turn it into an airplane jet engine by just using the car engine step by step for something else at each step of the way, like tweaking it slightly every step of the way. Every step is useful. Every purpose that I use it for, whether I just turn it into a paperweight or something else, is useful until I end up with a jet engine. The assumption for biology is that there's always this chain of events like that to create everything you see today. And my question that I end the PhD on is, could coordination evolve in every case? And I do think there are some cases that are particularly challenging. And my encouragement to evolutionary biologists is to investigate those cases in detail. I'm not going to make the conclusion on that question. I'll put the question in their lap. Yes. So
you've talked about coordination a lot. Has anyone else come up with an idea like it?
Yeah. So a lot of philosophers of biology will refer to complexity, and they'll refer to they'll even use words like coordination. They won't mean what I mean when they try to explain why biology looks designed. Or they might want to explain why biology looks like it has goals or functions, or a purpose. It looks like the purpose of my heart is to pump blood, and often guys like Robert Cummins, they'll appeal to complexity in how a system is organized, and they'll kind of relate it to why it looks like it has a purpose, but I don't think they do it in a very in as precise a way as I would like, and they certainly haven't come up with this exact notion that I'm describing to you about coordination. I think that maybe some people might say the closest idea that you might find is more in the intelligent design literature. You get this idea from Michael Behe called irreducible complexity. I've been asked that sometimes. It's like, what's the difference between what you're talking about and irreducible complexity? You're saying something needs to be complex enough to work. Sounds a lot like Michael Behe's idea of irreducible complexity. But I'll define his idea of irreducible complexity so that you can see they're not the same. So for irreducible complexity, as far as I understand it, it's the idea that there are things that are so complex that if you take any of their parts away, they will stop working. They're so complex that if you take any of their parts away, they will stop working. You cannot reduce the complexity of it without it breaking. So for example, it would be like saying my bike is irreducibly complex because if I take the wheels away, it stops working. If I take the chain away, it stops working. It's got that irreducible complexity. The problem with this notion of irreducible complexity is that Michael Behe will hold up examples of irreducible complexity, such as this thing called, have you heard of the bacterial flagellum?
No, I haven't. Could you
explain what that is?
Yeah.
Thank you for sustaining interest for this long. So bacteria have tails, basically, some bacteria, and they use those tails to move. So people on the podcast won't be able to see it, but if I bring up a diagram, it'll at least help me explain to Wupe here. So I'm just going to bring up a diagram of the bacterial flagellum. If this will load. Basically, Michael Behe appeals to this structure as a prime example of irreducible complexity. So for those on the podcast, what I'm showing on the screen now is a picture of what looks like a little bit like a car motor. This tail that bacteria use, it has rotors, it has stators, things that spin basically and things that remain. It has axles. It uses in the same way that a steam generator uses steam to generate electricity and energy and stuff. So this bacterial flagellum, it uses protons as if they were like steam. And as the protons move from one side of a membrane to the other, it causes rotation, which is pretty amazing. And so Michael Behe looks at this and he's like, this is an example of design, and it's irreducible complexity. Now, my objection to this is that, and I say it's mine, it's really other people's, but I do think that they have a point here, is that you actually can reduce the complexity of this without breaking it. There are many parts that are on the screen right now that you can remove. All of these molecular parts, some of them you can remove and it will still work. And you can even replace some of the parts with other parts and it will still work. And so the point people make is, but I can reduce the complexity and it still works. Whereas I would still say this is coordinated, because coordination is not telling you that it does that you can't tweak it and it breaks, or that you can't remove parts. All coordination is saying is that you need it to be complex enough to work. It's not saying that you can't add on extra parts or that you can't tweak them. It's just saying that, imagine I build this flagellum from the ground up. If I have just one piece, it's not going to cause the bacteria to move. If I have just two pieces, it's not going to cause the bacteria to move. If I have just three pieces, it's not going to cause the bacteria to move. But once it reaches a threshold of complexity, then it moves. And so what I would say is this, is that irreducible complexity might be a symptom of something being coordinated, but it is not the essence. Many coordinated structures have extra add-ons that you can remove. There are many structures that are coordinated, but they still have fluff. Even a bike. We've used the bike, right? Imagine I have the handlebars. You know how handlebars, sometimes they have these grips, right? We've established that the bike is coordinated because it needs all this complexity. But if I remove the grips on the handlebars, you could still ride the bike, right? Yeah. It would still work. Maybe the bike has a certain paint job. I can remove the paint job and the bike still works, right? Yeah. And so in that sense, someone might say the bike isn't irreducibly complex, but that doesn't mean it's not coordinated. That doesn't mean its ability to work doesn't depend on the complex arrangement of its parts. That's still true. And so I do think that the concepts are different, even if an instance of coordination might sometimes lead to a system being irreducibly complex.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Well, my brain short-circuited there for a moment.
I'm so sorry.
But I do get the idea of, complexity, then simplicity, or reducing something.
Yes.
I do get that.
Yes, exactly. Something can be coordinated and you can reduce the complexity.
Yeah.
So it's not the same as irreducible complexity. That's basically what I'm saying.
All right. Now, I've listened to podcasts or watched videos where evolution or whatever it is being talked about, and there's a term that I've heard called intelligent design. Sometimes it kind of feels like a way to not say God made the world.
Yeah.
As a Christian, I'm just like, God did. He made the earth, He made everything.
Christians and non-Christians feel that way about the intelligent design movement, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so it kind of feels like that's what the word is meant for, not to say God did. Yeah. We just say intelligent design.
Yeah.
Now,
it's like a sanitized version of creationism, some people think.
Exactly. Yeah. So, how do you feel about the intelligent design movement as a whole?
Okay. That is a big question. I have mixed feelings about it, basically. There are big players in the movement. The guy who's headed most of it up is a guy called Stephen Meyer. And reading some of his work, I like his work because he's very rigorous, very well researched. Even if you don't agree with him, his books, his arguments, they're meticulous. You read a book like Darwin's Death, and it's very, very meticulous in how it's argued. So I think, and maybe I like him so much because he's also a philosopher of science. He did his PhD, I think, at Cambridge, doing history and philosophy of science. And so I like that guy. But the issue I have with the intelligent design movement is they often don't define their terms very rigorously, and often it leads to goalpost shifting. Yeah. So, for example, they might say something like, evolution cannot produce new information. So, I don't know if you've heard that argument before. but people talk about information. I'm not going to define it here. My problem with them is that someone might respond saying, here's an example of evolution producing new information. And then the people in the intelligent design movement respond by saying, oh, that's not what we mean by information. And then you ask them, well, what do you mean by information? And they'll say something like this. Not exactly like this, but something like this. Information is functional data in the genome. So basically, it's you know how words communicate meaning?
Yes.
So they think that's what information is. So the words, the letters in the word, that's data, and the data means something. So that's what they mean by functional data. It's meaningful data. So you then say, okay, interesting. And then they might say something like this: evolution cannot produce new functions. And then you say, okay, but here's an example of evolution producing a new function. And they'll say, oh, that's not what we mean by function. and then you say, well, what do you mean by function? And the problem is the word function is integrated with their definition of information. But they don't define what function means. And so it's almost like they just keep changing the definition a priori and just saying evolution can't do these things without defining what it is that evolution can't do. And I find that a bit annoying. And that's why one of the motives, it's not even the main reason, but one of the reasons I'm doing the PhD is to define what functions are. Like, and I'm trying to use this concept of coordination to define how you know whether something has a purpose or a function or it looks like it has a goal. And if you can create a really rigorous definition of that, then maybe the intelligent design movement will be able to use that. And maybe they'll be able to say, sometimes evolution does produce new functions, but not always. And they can give a more nuanced response. So yeah. And it's also to say, like, in fact, I'll let you ask the next question. That's my main gripe, is philosophically, they need to define their terms better. One of the advantages, I hope, of my PhD is it might give people better definitions of function that they might want to work with.
Okay. Just a question I'm adding, we've talked about your PhD, what you're doing, what you're trying to research on. We've talked about evolution, intelligent design, coordination, complexity, simplicities, to name a few things. How should we, as people who don't engage as much with this, the way you do, especially as Christians, are we supposed to be on the edge saying, no, we don't want to engage with this at all?
Just disengage. It sounds too complicated.
How should we view all of this? How should we respond to this? And what would you have to say to that?
How should a Christian deal with these issues? Someone who isn't a nerd like me. Okay. So I would say this: your confidence comes from the gospel. It doesn't come from the latest advances of science. Both people on both sides of these sorts of arguments do this. If you believe that evolution explains all of life on Earth, sometimes that belief stems from the fact that your faith is more rooted in what science says than what Scripture says. Not always. Some people believe that evolution explains all of life on Earth because they think the Bible says we should listen to nature, and nature seems to tell us this. And then you get young Earth creationists as well. Their faith, it almost just goes up and down with every single scientific advancement. To both of those, to people on both sides whose faith kind of just goes up and down with what the science says, my encouragement is this: Jesus is the reason we're Christians. Look to the gospel. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that he did not speak words of eloquent wisdom, but he spoke knowing nothing but Christ and him crucified, so that our faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. The message of the gospel is simple. You can be right or wrong about intelligent design and not know Jesus. You can be right or wrong about young Earth creationism and not know Jesus. There are Jewish people who we love, and at the same time, if they don't know Jesus, we pray that they come to know him and be saved. And they believe in young Earth creationism. So we need, as Christians as a whole, I think we need to be good at separating primary issues, and even though they're important issues, they're still secondary issues, secondary to the gospel. So let your faith, even as I navigate, I've had all these, I've been in all of these camps. I've been intelligent design guy, theistic evolutionist guy. I've been old Earth creationist. I would say I'm currently, my bets are on young Earth creationism, but I'm willing to be wrong. Like, I'm willing to be wrong, because I do think that I almost end up having problems with all of these positions. Mm-hmm. But positively, my encouragement to Christians as well, who you don't need to explore these issues, but I can just tell you something I've found as I've explored these issues. God to me seems inescapable. No matter which position you hold, God seems inescapable. Even if you say God used evolution all the way down to a universal common ancestor to create life, there are so many things in the fossil record that I think are just wild and unpredictable. To me, they scream of certain interventions, but maybe I'm wrong. And even for those people who would disagree with me on that point that are Christians, they would still say ultimately the universe does look fine-tuned. You have these exquisitely precise physical constants that can't be tweaked by, like, on the level of more than a billionth of a fraction of a degree without the universe just becoming a mess of nothing soup. Like, it's so precise. And you can't escape it. And more than that, because Jesus doesn't change, you can't escape the resurrection. You can't escape fulfilled prophecy. You cannot escape the power of the gospel to change lives. You cannot escape the fact that Jesus said, that the gospel is going to be proclaimed to the Gentiles around the world. This crucified man being more influential than anyone else. Like, just look to Jesus if you want encouragement as a Christian. If you want to dabble with these issues, that's fine, but whether you do or whether you don't, that's where your confidence needs to be. It needs to be in Jesus.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that.
Yes.
Now, we're left with two questions here, but I'll just ask them as one. Is your work a contribution to the intelligent design movement or something else? And what do you hope to do after your PhD?
Thanks. So I hope my work contributes to almost any side of this argument. So as I've said, I hope it helps the intelligent design movement define their terms a bit better. But I also hope it helps people who believe that evolution explains everything. It gives them that question I said, how easily can this coordinated structure evolve? I hope it allows them to be able to draw a circle around biological traits that are coordinated so that they can really define what they are, and then rigorously explore that question of how easily they can evolve. And who knows? Maybe in many cases it can easily evolve. But I know that there are lots of places where there are certainly deep mysteries in evolution. They sometimes call it major evolutionary transitions, like the evolution of sexual reproduction. That's a huge challenge. The evolution of multicellularity. There are some answers, but it is not complete. And I think, again, hopefully me defining these terms a bit can help people answer those questions. And then the next question was, what do I want to do after the PhD?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's in God's hands. In terms of after the PhD, I want to get this idea out. This is my main motivation, because I can see people want to define what makes biology awesome, but it's so slippery. They haven't quite got it, like in a way that philosophers can't just relentlessly attack and make seem, oh well, no, that's just your opinion.
Yeah.
I want this idea out there so people can see God's wisdom in creation. So that might mean I have to stay in academia, because maybe I need to continue publishing until the idea gets out there. Maybe I need to finish it. Where that leads, maybe I'll stay in Europe, because I do want access to journals and stuff. But it might lead to me working at the ACU. If there's a research position that opens up in Zambia, then that would be great too. Maybe God will maybe I'll be bored and that's providence, and I'll just want to become a pastor or something. Like, I don't know. Like, it's in God's hands, but those are things that getting the idea out currently is my priority, and wherever that takes me, it's in God's hands.
As ACU, we do hope you can come back here or stay with us.
That would be nice, even if I've stretched your endurance mentally.
Oh yeah,
for the podcast.
I last did biology in 2018.
Nice.
So this discussion we've had made me nostalgic for
Really?
those lessons.
What did it make you nostalgic about?
So my biology teacher,
Yeah.
Mr. Soko, from the 10th grade all the way to the 12th grade,
Yeah.
he would always make us greet him like this when he walks in for his biology class. We stand up and say, biology, biology. It's time for biology.
Okay.
Biology is the study of life.
Like a mantra.
Good morning, Mr. Soko. And
Yeah.
the reason he made us do that was because one of his students years ago, when he just was a new teacher on the scene,
Yeah.
failed to answer the question in the exam, what is biology? And the answer is biology is the study of life.
Yes.
So because of that, he made all his subsequent classes after
Say the
that,
answer every single time.
every single time he walks in, biology, biology.
And you missed that?
I do. I just remembered it
You
today.
missed saying that?
And I remembered how much, at first it was irritating, but now it just became a song.
But then it just kind of sunk into me like like a brainwash or something. And every
Yeah.
morning I wake up in a cold sweat saying biology, biology. It's this,
Yeah.
I just miss it, man.
Yeah, so I do miss that, and I felt nostalgic about that. Well, there you have it, everyone. We've come to the end of our discussion. We thank you all for listening. all
Well
the way
done
to
for
the
making
end.
it this far.
Yeah, I hope he didn't melt your brains as he did for mine at certain points, but
Yes.
we trust that this was a fruitful discussion, a discussion that will get you thinking,
Yes.
Uh,
We
cha-
hope and pray.
challenging what you think about, and being open to research. So we thank you for that. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today,
Thanks,
for
Buffet.
sharing your thoughts with us. It wasn't easy, but we've made it to the end.
We've made it to the end.
All right, everyone, please make sure to follow this podcast, to follow us on all our social media platforms. We'll leave a link in the description below. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on potentially the first podcast.
Thank you.